There are moments when the universe holds its breath, when the fabric of reality stretches so thin that the boundaries between worlds become nothing more than suggestions. This is the story of three such moments, occurring simultaneously across three different realities, bound together by something far older and more terrible than any of them could comprehend. In the ruins of the Fourth Shinobi World War, Madara Uchiha stood atop a mountain of broken alliances and shattered dreams. His hair, white as winter frost, moved in a wind that carried the ash of 1,000 burned futures. Around him, the world trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. The infinite Tsukiyomi was within reach, a technique so absolute it would rewrite reality itself, trapping every living soul in a dream of perfect peace. Peace through domination. Peace through the erasure of choice itself. Madara had seen the ugliness of free will. He had watched children become soldiers, watched love transform into hatred, watched hope curdle into despair across 100 battlefields. The answer was simple, elegant even. If humanity could not choose peace, then peace would be chosen for them. His Sharingan eyes, burning with the power of gods, reflected a moon turning blood red above him. In moments the illusion would cascade across his world like a benevolent plague, and suffering would become nothing more than a forgotten nightmare. But something else stirred in that moment. Something ancient recognized the weight of his conviction. Across the void of space, in a different universe entirely, Thanos sat alone on a dead world. The planet beneath him had been beautiful once. Now it was a monument to inevitability. Half its population had perished in a catastrophe of their own making: overpopulation, resource depletion, systematic collapse. The other half had survived only long enough to watch their civilization crumble into dust. Thanos had tried to warn them. They had called him mad. The Titan warlord's purple skin was weathered by centuries of purposeful destruction, his eyes holding the weary wisdom of someone who had learned the universe's cruelest truth. Mercy and cruelty were often indistinguishable. He had culled populations across 1,000 worlds, always precisely, always fairly. Random, dispassionate, rich and poor alike. The universe groaned under the weight of finite resources and infinite hunger. Balance demanded sacrifice. Love demanded death. His massive hand traced patterns in the dust of civilizations, calculating probabilities, measuring futures. Soon he would possess the Infinity Stones. Soon he would have the power to correct the universe's greatest flaw with a single snap. Half of all life gone in an instant. Not as punishment, but as salvation. The survivors would inherit abundance. Children would know full bellies. The universe would breathe again. In that moment of absolute certainty, something vast and incomprehensible turned its attention toward him. In yet another realm, in a galaxy consumed by mechanized war, General Grievous moved through the corridors of a Republic cruiser like death given purpose. His 4 lightsabers carved geometry into the darkness, each movement precise, economical, beautiful in its brutality. Behind him lay 17 Jedi corpses, their expressions frozen in the moment they realized their Force-granted destiny could not save them from pure, calculated violence. Grievous had been a warrior once, flesh and blood and honor. Then came the shuttle accident, or was it an assassination? The line between tragedy and conspiracy had blurred in the agony of his transformation. They had rebuilt him, piece by piece, replacing organic weakness with terrestrial certainty. Now he was more machine than living being, his original biology reduced to vital organs suspended in a cage of metal and malice. The Jedi spoke of the Force as if it were a living thing, a cosmic mediator between light and dark. Grievous had learned a different truth. The Force was irrelevant. What mattered was fear. What mattered was the systematic destruction of hope. Every Jedi he killed proved the fragility of their mystical faith. Every lightsaber he added to his collection was another piece of evidence that destiny could be butchered as easily as flesh. His mechanical lungs wheezed with each breath, a reminder of the pain that never stopped, never dulled, never gave him peace. Pain was his constant companion, his fuel, his reason. The separatist cause was merely an excuse. What he truly hunted was not Republic soldiers or Jedi Knights, but the momentary satisfaction of making others feel the helplessness he carried in his augmented chest. And in that moment, as his clawed feet struck terrestrial deck plating, something older than the Jedi and Sith combined reached out through the spaces between spaces. 3 men, 3 philosophies, 3 absolute convictions that the universe required their particular brand of salvation. Madara believed in peace through controlled illusion, a reality where suffering existed only in forgotten dreams. Thanos believed in balance through necessary extinction, a mercy so terrible only he possessed the will to deliver it. Grievous believed in nothing but the systematic application of terror, a world where hope was revealed as the lie it always had been. The Force, or something wearing the Force like a mask, felt them all. It recognized the weight of their certainty, the density of their conviction. In the quantum spaces between universes, where possibility became probability and probability became inevitability, something ancient stirred. Perhaps it was the living force responding to three souls whose determination had bent their entire realities around them. Perhaps it was the cosmic force seeking to correct an imbalance it could no longer tolerate. Or perhaps it was simply that the universe occasionally enjoys watching titans collide. Reality fractured, not with sound but with a silence so complete it devoured thought itself. Three worlds screamed. Three men felt the ground beneath them stop being ground and start being nothing. The space between atoms expanded. Time became negotiable. And in the horrible, wonderful instant before they vanished from their respective universes, each of them understood one terrible truth. Something had judged them worthy of a larger stage. The corridor between worlds swallowed them whole, and three conquerors began their journey into a galaxy that had no idea what was coming. The space between universes is not empty. It is filled with the screaming potential of everything that could be but isn't, everything that was but no longer remains, everything that will be but hasn't yet occurred. For most beings, exposure to such a place would result in immediate psychic dissolution. Consciousness would simply stop being conscious, scattered across probability like ash in a hurricane. Madara, Thanos, and Grievous were not most beings. The Force tried to understand them. It reached out with tendrils of cosmic awareness, attempting to integrate these foreign elements into its eternal dance of light and dark, life and death, creation and entropy. What it found shook the foundations of destiny itself. Madara's chakra system was unlike anything the Force had ever encountered. Where the Force flowed through living beings as a river flows through a landscape, chakra was the landscape itself, reality made malleable through will and spiritual energy. The Sharingan in his eyes perceived the Force not as an omnipresent field, but as another form of Genjutsuan illusion that convinced the galaxy it had meaning. Within the void, Madara's consciousness expanded. He could see the Force visions that guided Jedi and seduced Sith. He could perceive the branching futures that prophecies claimed were inevitable. And he laughed, because he recognized the architecture of controlled narrative, the careful construction of destiny designed to make slaves believe they were free. His Rinnegan activated, and the Force itself recoiled. Here was a being who had already transcended death, who had manipulated reincarnation as casually as others manipulated tools, who had literally rewritten the fundamental nature of reality in his own universe. The Force showed him visions of the future empire and rebellion, Sith and Jedi, endless cycles of conflict masquerading as meaning. Madara saw through them instantly. These were not futures, they were prisons, elaborate cages built from prophecy and destiny, designed to ensure that change remained superficial while the fundamental nature of suffering remained eternal. It was exactly the kind of cosmic lie he had dedicated his existence to destroying. The Force tried to categorize him. Light side? Dark side? But Madara existed in a space beyond such binary thinking. He was neither and both, a being who had concluded that morality itself was the problem, that choice was the disease, and that only through absolute control could anything approaching peace exist. When his chakra touched the Force, visions across the galaxy fractured. Jedi who relied on meditation to glimpse the future suddenly saw nothing but their own desires reflected back at them, beautiful and false. The Force had encountered illusion before, but never illusion so sophisticated it could deceive reality itself. Thanos experienced the transition differently. Where Madara saw the Force as another system to be understood and overcome, Thanos saw it as another equation requiring solution. His mind, honed by centuries of calculated genocide, began immediately analyzing the metaphysical laws governing this new reality. The Force pressed against his consciousness, trying to subsume him, trying to make him part of its eternal balance. It found only immovable will. Thanos had resisted the Infinity Stones themselves, had held cosmic power in his hands without being corrupted because his purpose transcended personal desire. The Force offered him visions of power, showed him how he could become a Sith Lord capable of reshaping the galaxy. He was not impressed. The Force was inefficient, he concluded. It allowed civilizations to flourish beyond their sustainable limits, enabled populations to spread across thousands of worlds without regard for resource constraints. The galaxy he was entering was committing slow suicide, distracted by the spectacle of light versus dark, while the fundamental mathematics of survival went unaddressed. The dark side reached for him, sensing a kindred spirit in his willingness to embrace terrible necessity. But Thanos rejected its seduction not out of virtue but out of pragmatism. The dark side was emotional, driven by passion and hatred and the petty desires of individuals seeking power for its own sake. His crusade was not emotional. It was statistical. It was merciful precisely because it was dispassionate. When the Force tried to show him his destiny, Thanos looked beyond it and saw the numbers. Trillions of beings consuming, reproducing, expanding without consideration for the inevitable collapse. He had seen it before on thousands of worlds. This galaxy was not special. It was simply larger. The Force shuddered at his assessment because he was right. Unchecked, the galactic population was heading toward catastrophic resource wars that would make the Clone Wars look like a diplomatic disagreement. Thanos saw the future not through mystical vision but through brutal extrapolation, and what he saw required correction. Grievous fell through the void, experiencing only rage and pain, amplified to excruciating levels by his proximity to the dark side of the Force. Unlike Madara's transcendent power or Thanos's philosophical certainty, Grievous brought something simpler and more terrible: the absolute rejection of redemption. The dark side recognized him immediately. Here was suffering without hope of healing, anger without possibility of resolution, hatred refined into an art form. It reached out to embrace him, to offer him power beyond his cybernetic enhancements, to make him a Sith Lord who could challenge Vader himself. But Grievous wanted none of it. He did not seek power. He did not crave dominion. He wanted only to continue doing what he had always done, making others suffer as he suffered, proving through systematic violence that meaning was a lie, and hope was a weakness waiting to be exploited. The Force tried to soothe his pain, to offer him balance, to show him a path towards something other than endless butchery. His mechanical systems rejected every overture with the efficiency of a well-designed immune system. He had been betrayed by organics, rebuilt by machines, and forged in the space between into something that could not be redeemed because redemption required the belief that something better was possible. Grievous believed in nothing, and that made him more dangerous than any Sith because the dark side at least cared about something. Grievous simply wanted the galaxy to burn while he collected trophies from those who believed they mattered. 3 presences the Force could not harmonize, 3 philosophies it could not balance, 3 certainties that would not bend. Reality solidified around them, and they arrived in a galaxy completely unprepared for what they represented. They did not arrive together. The Force, wounded by their passage through its deepest currents, scattered them across imperial space like shrapnel from an exploding star. Each landed where they would do the most philosophical damage, where their presence would crack the foundations of galactic certainty most efficiently. Madara materialized above Korriban, the ancient Sith world, where tombs of dead Dark Lords stretched beneath red sands like scars across the planet's surface. He descended slowly, letting gravity become optional, his white hair and crimson armor stark against the perpetual twilight. Imperial archaeologists studying the ruins looked up to see a figure that should not exist hovering in the sky with eyes that burned like dying suns. The Imperial garrison responded with professional efficiency. Stormtroopers formed firing lines. AT-ST walkers thundered across ancient stone. A star destroyer in orbit turned its gun batteries toward the unidentified aerial target. Standard procedure for dealing with Force-sensitive terrorists or rogue Jedi remnants. Madara observed their response with the detached interest of an artist evaluating an amateur's brushstrokes. He made a single hand sign, precise and economical, and the world changed. The genjutsu cascaded across Korriban like a wave of beautiful poison. Stormtroopers saw their weapons transform into flowers, watched their armor melt into robes of silk, felt their training and conditioning evaporate like morning mist. The AT-ST pilots experienced an overwhelming certainty that they were already home, safe with families they might never have had, living peaceful lives in retirement they would never reach. The Star Destroyer's crew watched their instruments confirm impossible readings. Their ship was not in orbit but docked safely at Coruscant. The war was over. The Emperor had declared eternal peace, and they could finally rest. Every single one of them believed it absolutely. On the ground, Madara walked among the paralyzed garrison as if touring a museum. They saw him, but their brains refused to process threat. Some saw a commanding officer. Others saw a beloved leader. A few saw nothing at all, their perceptions simply edited to remove anything that might cause alarm. The entire planetary defense had surrendered without a single shot fired, without any of them realizing they had lost. He paused before the entrance to the greatest tomb, where Darth Bane had once studied the ancient Sith arts. The dark side was strong here, accumulated over millennia, dense with the residue of 1,000 power-hungry lords who had believed they understood domination. Madara extended his senses and found their philosophies quaint. They had competed for power as if power were the point. They had mistaken control over others for control over reality itself. His Susanoo manifested as a translucent giant of crystalline chakra, and with a single motion, he tore the tomb open like a surgeon opening a chest cavity. Inside, holocrons glowed with stored Sith wisdom. Madara examined them briefly, then dismissed them. These ancient lords had never escaped the trap of individuality, never understood that true peace required the elimination of separate wills competing for separate futures. A disturbance rippled through the Force. Somewhere, a Jedi felt the impossible happen. An entire world's worth of living beings simply vanishing from the Force's awareness, their futures erased, their destinies rewritten by something that should not be able to rewrite destiny. Panic spread through the Jedi Temple's meditation chambers. Panic spread through Palpatine's throne room. Something new had entered the galaxy, and it played by rules that made the Force itself obsolete. Meanwhile, halfway across the outer rim, Thanos stepped onto the industrialized wasteland of Geonosis. The planet that had birthed the Clone Wars was still recovering from Republic bombardment, its population devastated, its droid factories reduced to skeletal ruins. It was a monument to galactic inefficiency, billions of resources expended to produce weapons that would kill billions more, all in service of a conflict that had solved nothing. The surviving Genosians, insectoid beings who had rebuilt a fraction of their hive civilization, detected his arrival. They sent warriors, mandibles clicking in aggressive formation, wings carrying them in swarms that had evolved to overwhelm predators through sheer numbers. Thanos did not run, did not raise his hands in defense. He simply stood in the center of their approach and waited. When the first wave reached him, he began. Each movement was precise, each strike lethal. But more than that, each kill was calculated. His massive hands crushed chitin and bone with the efficiency of someone who had spent lifetimes perfecting the mathematics of death. He was not angry. He was not cruel. He was simply correcting an imbalance with the focused intensity of a master craftsman. Within an hour, exactly half of Genosis's population was dead. Not the weak, not the old, not the criminal or the innocent. Half.
Random.
Fair. The survivors stared at him with compound eyes that could not comprehend mercy that looked like genocide. Thanos addressed them in a voice that rumbled like continents grinding together. Your world nearly died in a war you did not start but enabled. Your numbers exceed your capacity for sustainable resource allocation. I have given you balance. What you do with this gift will determine if I return. He left them there, terrified and alive in precisely equal measure, while Imperial censors tried and failed to classify what had just occurred. A single being had decimated a planetary population with surgical efficiency, then departed as if completing a routine task. No weapons, no anger, no demands, just mathematics made manifest. And in the deep core, on a world whose name had been classified to prevent pilgrimages, Grievous awoke in a separatist shipyard that had been mothballed after the Clone Wars' end. His mechanical systems activated one by one, diagnostics running, combat subroutines initializing. The last thing he remembered was hunting Jedi. Now he stood in an abandoned factory surrounded by deactivated battle droids and decomposing tactical computers. He accessed the shipyard's remaining data archives and learned of the Empire, of Vader, of the Jedi Purge. His vocabulator emitted something that might have been laughter if it had not sounded so much like grinding metal. They had won. The Separatists had lost, but their enemy had also been destroyed. The Republic was dead. The Jedi were extinct. And in their place, an empire that ruled through fear and systematic oppression. It was beautiful. Grievous began reactivating the shipyard. His mechanical expertise, honed through years of commanding Separatist fleets, made the process trivial. battle droids stirred from years of dormancy. Vulture droids powered up. Old transmission codes reached out across the deep core to other forgotten installations where dormant separatist loyalists had waited for a signal that their war was not over. Within days, an army began to coalesce. Not for ideology or freedom or any of the lies that had animated the Clone Wars. This army existed for a simpler purpose: to remind the galaxy that hope was a temporary condition and terror was the only honest teacher. Grievous stood at the bridge of a refurbished Munificent-class frigate and felt something like satisfaction. His wheezing mechanical lungs drew breath, and he opened a channel to every ship under his command. The Jedi died believing they mattered. The Republic fell believing it would be remembered. Now, we will teach this empire the same lesson. Nothing lasts, nothing matters, and everyone dies afraid. His fleet jumped to hyperspace, and the galaxy's nightmare had only begun. The Sith had always believed they understood power. For 1,000 years, they had operated in shadow, following the rule of two, one master and one apprentice, building toward the moment when they would overthrow the Jedi and rule the galaxy. Palpatine had achieved that goal. The Empire was his monument. Vader was his weapon. And the Force, dark and light both, was his to command. Then reports began filtering through Imperial intelligence of 3 impossible beings who did not care about his power at all. Palpatine sent Inquisitors first. Former Jedi, broken and reforged into hunters of their own kind, they were expendable tools for investigating anomalies. The 5th brother and 7th sister tracked Madara to a trade station on the edge of the Gordian Reach, where he had been methodically dismantling a spice cartel through the simple expedient of making its members forget why they wanted money. The Inquisitors arrived with lightsabers igniting, with threats honed by Vader himself, with the full authority of the dark side channeled through rage and pain. Madara observed them with the expression of someone watching children play with dangerous toys they did not understand. "You wield the Force as if it commands you," he said quietly. "In my world we learned long ago that power without wisdom is just noise." The 5th brother attacked first, his spinning lightsaber designed to overwhelm defenses through unpredictable angles. Madara did not move, did not dodge, did not defend. The lightsaber passed through him as if through smoke. The Inquisitor stumbled, confused, his Force senses screaming contradictions. Was the target there? Was he an illusion? Was reality itself broken? "You are not even seeing me," Madara explained with infinite patience. "You are seeing what I allow you to see. Your Force tells you I exist, your eyes confirm it, but both are liars when I choose them to be." The 7th sister attempted a Force grip, trying to crush his throat with telekinetic pressure. Madara's Sharingan spun lazily, and suddenly she was gripping her own throat. Her Force technique reversed and reflected with the casual ease of someone flipping a mirror. She collapsed, gasping, while Madara continued speaking as if teaching a class. "Your dark side thrives on emotion. Anger, fear, hatred. These are tools, yes, but they are also leashes. You think you wield the dark side, but really, it wields you. In my world, we learn to look beneath the underneath. Power is not in feeling strongly. Power is in making others feel nothing at all." He left them alive but shaken, their spirits broken not by violence but by the casual demonstration that everything they believed about the Force was provincially limited. When they reported back to Vader, their words carried the weight of existential terror. They had encountered something that made the dark side itself seem quaint. Vader himself sought Thanos on Mustafar, the lava world where he had been broken and reborn. It was fitting, he thought, to confront this new threat in the place where he had learned that mercy was weakness. The Titan warlord stood at the edge of a lava flow, watching rivers of molten stone with the detached interest of someone calculating thermodynamic efficiency. "You have killed billions," Vader stated, his respirator punctuating the accusation with mechanical rhythm. "The Empire demands you account for these crimes." Thanos turned slowly, studying the black armor, the life support systems, the rage bound in durasteel. "I have corrected billions," he replied. "There is a difference. Your empire kills to control. I kill to preserve. You serve a tyrant who hoards power. I serve the only master that matters, mathematical inevitability. You speak of mathematics while committing genocide. I speak of survival while preventing extinction. Your galaxy reproduces without limit, consumes without consequence, expands without wisdom. I have studied the trajectories. Within 5 centuries, Resource wars will sterilize every inhabited world. The Force will not save you. Prophecy will not save you. Only balance can save you, and balance requires sacrifice. Vader ignited his lightsaber, red blade screaming in the sulphurous air. Then you will be the first sacrifice. The duel was brief and revelatory. Vader was among the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever produced, his command of the Force refined through decades of hate and pain. But Thanos had fought gods. He had brawled with beings who could shatter moons, had endured the Power Stone's energy channel directly through his nervous system, had stood at the precipice of cosmic omnipotence without flinching. Vader's lightsaber struck Thanos' armor and sparked without penetrating. The Force push that should have sent the Titan tumbling into lava instead left him immobile as a mountain. And when Thanos moved, it was with the terrible economy of someone who knew exactly how much force was required to break every bone in a human body without killing them. He caught Vader's lightsaber arm at the wrist, applied precisely calculated pressure, and Vader heard his mechanical limbs' servos scream in protest. "Your suit is remarkable," Thanos observed. "A testament to medical engineering, but also a prison. You were powerful once, before your injuries. Now you are merely dangerous, and you mistake survival for victory." He released Vader without delivering a killing blow, without even continuing the fight. "Your Emperor understands power but not purpose. He has built an empire that solves nothing, merely consolidates his own ego. When I am ready, I will show him what true sacrifice looks like. Until then, tell him this. His force is irrelevant to the mathematics of survival." Thanos walked away, leaving Vader alive not out of mercy but out of strategic calculation. Dead, Vader was a martyr. Alive and humiliated, he was a message. Meanwhile, Grievous carved his own message across a dozen systems. He did not engage in philosophy. He did not debate the Sith or challenge the Empire's ideology. He simply appeared wherever Jedi had been rumored to hide, and he killed them with the methodical enthusiasm of someone doing the only thing he knew how to do well. Palpatine watched reports accumulate and felt, for the first time in decades, something approaching uncertainty. 3 beings who rejected the Force's binary of light and dark. 3 philosophies that treated his carefully constructed empire as irrelevant. 3 threats that could not be seduced, intimidated, or understood within the framework of Sith tradition. The galaxy was no longer his to control. It had become a cage with new predators, and even the Emperor was no longer sure who was prey. Empires do not collapse suddenly. They fracture slowly, incrementally, through accumulated failures too small to notice until the structure itself becomes unsustainable. The Galactic Empire, built on the corpse of the Republic and maintained through fear, had always been fragile despite its apparent invincibility. Now, 3 forces converged to exploit that fragility in ways Palpatine had never anticipated. The Emperor convened his inner circle Grand Moffs, admirals, inquisitors, and Vader himself in a strategy session that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Palpatine did not consult. He commanded. But these 3 anomalies had forced him into the uncomfortable position of needing perspective beyond his own dark side omniscience. "They must be eliminated," Grand Moff Tarkin stated with his characteristic confidence. The Death Star becomes operational within weeks. One demonstration of its power will prove to these intruders that this galaxy belongs to the Empire. Palpatine said nothing, but his eyes glowed with consideration. The Death Star was his masterpiece of terror, a weapon so absolute it could destroy planets, making rebellion not just futile but unthinkable. Yet something about Tarkin's certainty troubled him. These 3 beings had already proven conventional power was inadequate. Coordinate a full military response. The Emperor finally commanded. 3 theaters of operation. Maximum force applied simultaneously. Show them that the Empire's might is infinite. It was exactly the wrong decision, born from the institutional arrogance that had blinded Rome, Napoleon, and every other seemingly unstoppable force throughout history. The Empire had grown so accustomed to overwhelming resistance through superior firepower that it had forgotten how to adapt to threats that did not conform to established tactical doctrine. The assault on Madara's position was orchestrated by Admiral Thrawn himself, the Kiss tactical genius who had never met a problem he could not solve through careful analysis. He tracked Madara to Ryloth, where the Uchiha had been conducting what Imperial intelligence described as psychological warfare on a planetary scale. Thrawn deployed 3 Star Destroyers, 2 full Stormtrooper legions, and a complement of TIE fighters that would have been sufficient to subjugate entire sectors. He studied Madara's pattern, the way he operated through misdirection, the way he dismantled resistance psychologically rather than militarily, and crafted a response designed to overwhelm perception itself through sheer material reality. The fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, an iron constellation designed to project invincible authority. Thrawn opened a communication channel, his Kiss accent precise and cultured. "You have demonstrated remarkable abilities. However, you face the full might of the Imperial Navy. Surrender, and your gifts can be utilized in service of order." Madara's response was silence. Then, reality fractured. The infinite Tsukuyomi technique he had prepared across weeks of subtle manipulation activated all at once. Every Imperial soldier, every ship officer, every pilot suddenly found themselves experiencing not battle but homecoming. Thrawn watched his crew embrace illusions with the relief of prisoners released from lifetimes of duty. His own Kiss psychology proved resistant longer than human minds, but eventually even his analytical discipline collapsed under the weight of seeing his lost homeworld restored, his people greeting him as a returned hero. 3 Star Destroyers hung in orbit, fully operational but entirely dormant. Every single crew member lived in personal paradises crafted from their deepest desires, none of them violent, none of them terrible. Just peace, just rest, just the absence of endless war. Madara had not killed them. He had given them exactly what every Imperial soldier secretly craved: a reason to stop fighting. When Imperial reinforcements arrived weeks later, they found the fleet intact but crewed by smiling corpses, bodies sustained by the 4th nutrients while their minds lived in dreams of perfect contentment. The horror was not in the violence but in its absence, in the demonstration that the Empire's greatest weapon, its soldiers' obedience, could be turned into their greatest prison. Simultaneously, the Empire's logistics network encountered Thanos. The Titan had identified supply routes, manufacturing centers, and distribution hubs that kept the Imperial war machine operational. His approach was surgical. He did not destroy the facilities, he did not kill all the workers, he simply balanced them. On Fondor, the shipyards that produced Star Destroyers woke to find exactly half their workforce dead, chosen randomly regardless of rank or skill. Production immediately collapsed. On Bilbringi, asteroid miners discovered half their excavation crews gone, making operations unsustainable. On Quat, the most critical military manufacturing center in the galaxy, half the engineers, half the fabricators, half the managers vanished in a single night. Thanos left messages at each site, broadcast on every frequency. Your empire builds weapons faster than it builds futures. Your production exceeds your sustainability. I have corrected the imbalance. If growth resumes without wisdom, I will correct again. The Empire's economy, built on constant expansion and military production, hemorrhaged efficiency. Tarkin's Death Star project found itself starved of resources as supply chains collapsed. World after world discovered that their populations had been balanced, forcing survivors to choose between maintaining Imperial quotas and ensuring basic survival. The terror was elegant. Thanos did not need to fight the Empire's military. He simply needed to prove that its economic foundation was built on unsustainable mathematics, and that correction was inevitable whether administered mercifully or discovered through catastrophic collapse. And then there was Grievous, who brought not philosophy but pure, escalating horror. His rebuilt separatist fleet emerged from the deep core like a plague of steel locusts. He targeted Imperial worlds with particular precision. Those that had been Republic strongholds during the Clone Wars, those where former Jedi had hidden, those where hope had lingered longest after the Empire's rise. He did not occupy, he did not convert. He simply arrived, annihilated any resistance, and departed, leaving behind recordings of his massacres broadcast on every channel. The message was always the same: your empire promises order. I promise only certainty. Everyone dies, everything ends. The only question is whether you die believing your life mattered. Civilian populations, already ground down by Imperial oppression, found themselves caught between 2 forms of authoritarianism, one that promised security through control, another that promised nothing but demonstrated absolute commitment to proving hope was a lie. Rebellious sentiment evaporated not because people loved the Empire but because resistance seemed cosmically futile, when even the Resistance's existence was predicated on hope. Grievous systematically murdered. His attacks on remaining Jedi were particularly theatrical. He would announce his arrival days in advance, giving them time to prepare, to rally whatever Force-sensitive allies remained. Then he would arrive and kill them anyway, methodically, slowly, proving that the Force granted no protection against an opponent who simply did not care about destiny. Palpatine watched his empire fracture in 3 directions simultaneously. Madara was turning his soldiers into smiling shells. Thanos was proving Imperial logistics were mathematically unsustainable. Grievous was demonstrating that terror required no ideology to be effective. The Emperor had spent decades consolidating power, eliminating rivals, perfecting his dark side mastery. Now he faced 3 beings who rejected the very framework of Sith philosophy. They did not want his throne. They did not covet his power. They simply wanted to prove their respective philosophies correct, and his empire was the laboratory where they conducted their experiments. For the first time since declaring himself emperor, Palpatine felt something approaching fear. Not of death, he had transcended such mundane concerns, but of irrelevance. The Force had always been his to command. Now it was becoming clear that the Force itself might be a provincial concern in a cosmos where will, mathematics and nihilism could operate independently of its cosmic balance. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the Emperor realized he was no longer the most dangerous thing in his own empire. It was inevitable that they would meet. 3 forces of nature, each reshaping the galaxy according to incompatible visions, could not occupy the same reality indefinitely without confrontation. The Force itself seemed to engineer their convergence, or perhaps it was simply that beings of such monumental will created gravitational distortions that pulled them toward each other like black holes destined to merge. The meeting occurred on Malachor, a dead world where ancient Sith and Jedi had annihilated each other in a superweapons blast thousands of years prior. The planet was a tomb of frozen combatants, their bodies preserved mid-battle, a monument to the futility of the light versus dark binary that had consumed the galaxy for millennia. It was fitting, then, that 3 philosophies which rejected that binary would choose this place or be chosen by it for their confrontation. Madara arrived first, drawn by the residual Force energy. He walked among the petrified warriors with clinical interest, studying their final moments. They died believing their side was righteous, he murmured. Light, dark. Both convinced their cause justified the slaughter. Both wrong. Peace cannot be negotiated between competing wills. It must be imposed. An interesting hypothesis. Thanos' voice resonated across the dead city as he emerged from the temple ruins. But you mistake control for solution. Dominating the will does not address resource scarcity. Your illusion of peace is as unsustainable as their war. Both consume more than they produce. Madara turned slowly, sharing an eyes analyzing the Titan. And your solution? Murder half the galaxy to temporarily delay inevitable regrowth. You call it balance. I call it an admission that you lack the imagination to solve the root problem. The root problem is existence itself. Grievous's mechanical voice scraped across stone as he descended from above, his forearms spreading like a predatory insect's limbs. You both construct elaborate philosophies to justify what you want. Peace, balance, survival. All lies we tell ourselves to pretend life has meaning beyond pain and extinction. The 3 stood in a triangle, each equally distant from the others, each representing absolute conviction that their worldview was not opinion but observable truth. Madara spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had literally transcended mortality. You misunderstand me, Titan. I do not want to rule. I want to end the cycle of suffering by making suffering impossible. Every being in my infinite Tsukuyomi will experience perfect existence. No loss, no pain, no war. Consciousness preserved in absolute peace. While their bodies wither and die, sustained by artificial means, Thanos countered. Your peace is extinction with extra steps. At least I am honest about the cost. Half must die so, half can thrive. Immediate, permanent, fair. Your illusion is mercy that refuses to call itself murder. Both of you still believe existence is worth preserving, Grievous interjected, his vocabulator giving his words a grinding quality.
Why, what has life given any of us but agony?
Madara, you watched your closest friend betray your shared dream. Thanos, you watched your world die while they called you mad. I was broken and rebuilt into this monstrosity. And you both conclude the answer is to save people from themselves. You advocate for universal extinction? Madara asked with genuine curiosity. I advocate for nothing. Advocacy requires caring. I simply demonstrate what all sentient beings spend their lives denying. Hope is a lie, meaning is self-deception, and the only honest response to existence is to make others feel the truth of their own irrelevance before they die. Thanos studied Grievous with the expression of someone examining a mathematical proof that was technically correct but philosophically repugnant. You have reduced yourself to a variable in an equation you claim has no solution. If nothing matters, why continue? Why fight? Why exist at all? Because ending would suggest I believe non-existence is better. I don't. Existence and non-existence are equally meaningless. So I exist, and I kill, and I prove to everyone I meet that their force and their destiny and their precious hope change nothing. The three fell silent, each processing the fundamental incompatibility of their worldviews. Madara saw collective peace through dominated will. Thanos saw species survival through mathematical culling. Grievous saw only the systematic revelation that nothing meant anything. We cannot coexist, Thanos stated with the finality of proven theorem. Your methods undermine sustainability. Your philosophies encourage the waste I was born to prevent. Your mathematics ignore consciousness, Madara replied. Beings are not numbers on a balance sheet. They are wills to be aligned, not populations to be managed. And you are both fools spending energy on preservation, Grievous added, his mechanical lungs wheezing. But predictable fools, which means you will fight, which means you will suffer, which means I will watch, and when you are weak, I will kill you both and add your philosophies to my collection of failed ideologies. The tension should have erupted into immediate violence. Three beings of cosmic-level power, each capable of reshaping reality according to their respective visions, standing meters apart with completely incompatible objectives. But none of them moved, because this was not a confrontation that could be resolved through simple combat. This was a conflict of first principles, of foundational assumptions about reality itself. Defeating an opponent physically would prove nothing. Madara could trap them in illusion, but illusion did not refute mathematical necessity. Thanos could kill them, but mathematics could not answer whether consciousness had value beyond calculation. Grievous could slaughter them both, but violence did not prove meaning was absent, only that violence was possible. They were locked in philosophical stalemate, each powerful enough to hurt the others but unable to prove their worldview superior through force. We will meet again, Madara said finally. And when we do, I will show you what true peace looks like. We will meet again, Thanos agreed. And when we do, I will show you what necessary sacrifice demands. We will meet again, Grievous confirmed. And when we do, I will show you what all philosophy becomes when confronted with four lightsabers and the willingness to use them. They separated without battle, each returning to their respective campaigns, each now aware that the galaxy was not large enough for three absolute truths. The question was not whether they would fight, but whether the galaxy would survive when they finally did. Above Malachar, the Force swirled in confusion, unable to reconcile three futures that could not coexist, unable to choose between three destinies that each demanded totality. The calm before annihilation felt like peace. It was not. The galaxy did not collapse overnight. It bled slowly, incrementally, as three competing absolutisms peeled away the structures that had kept civilization functional for millennia. What emerged was not chaos but something worse. A universe where every choice was revealed as equally catastrophic, where survival meant choosing not the right answer but the least apocalyptic wrong one. Madara accelerated his operations with systematic precision. He had spent months studying the galaxy's political and military infrastructure, identifying the critical nodes where imperial control depended on fear, obedience, and the coordination of vast bureaucratic systems. Now he began dismantling them through the simple expedient of making people forget why they were afraid. On Coruscant Imperial Center itself, he manifested in the Senate building where puppet politicians ratified the Emperor's edicts without question. He did not kill them. He did not threaten them. He simply placed them under genjutsu so subtle they never knew their thoughts were not their own. When they returned to their sectors, they brought with them a viral calmness that spread through administrative networks like a benevolent plague. Governors stopped enforcing quotas. Tax collectors forgot why revenue mattered. Stormtroopers found themselves unable to remember why they were pointing weapons at civilians, not because they had been ordered to stand down, but because the connection between cause and effect, between imperial doctrine and violent enforcement, had been severed at the neurological level. Entire sectors simply not in rebellion, not in collapse, but in a peaceful, bewildered paralysis where everyone agreed something needed to be done but no one could quite remember what or why. Madara's infinite Tsukuyomi was not yet complete, but its preliminary effects were already demonstrating his thesis. Peace was possible if you simply removed the capacity for conflict from consciousness itself, but peace built on neurological manipulation had costs. On agricultural worlds, farmers forgot to harvest because the urgency of survival had been edited from their awareness. On industrial worlds, factories ceased production because workers could no longer connect their labor to any meaningful outcome. Children stopped crying when hurt because pain itself seemed abstract, distant, not quite real. The empire's structure depended on fear, but it also depended on functional populations who understood cause and effect. Madara was proving that consciousness without conflict was also consciousness without motivation, and that peace without struggle was indistinguishable from civilizational sedation. Thanos observed Madara's experiment with analytical disgust. The Uchiha was treating symptoms while ignoring the disease. Even if every being in the galaxy lived in perfect pacified contentment, they would still consume resources, still reproduce, still expand, until the mathematical limits reasserted themselves. Peace did not address sustainability. It merely postponed the inevitable reckoning. So Thanos escalated his own solution with systematic brutality. He had initially targeted military and industrial infrastructure, proving the Empire's logistics were unsustainable. Now he expanded his culling to civilian populations with the same dispassionate efficiency. Not as punishment, but as correction. He would arrive on a world, access its census data, calculate its carrying capacity relative to available resources, and then eliminate the excess with randomized selection. Rich and poor, young and old, useful and useless. The only criterion was mathematics. Afterward, he would remain long enough to ensure survivors understood the gift they had received. Sustainable existence purchased through terrible but necessary sacrifice. Some worlds collapsed into chaos as survivors turned on each other, blaming some phantom conspiracy for the deaths. Other worlds rallied, using their reduced populations to build more efficient, less wasteful civilizations. Thanos did not judge either response. Outcomes were not his concern. The mathematics of balance were all that mattered, but balance achieved through mass murder created its own cascading failures. Families were bisected. Essential workers vanished, leaving critical infrastructure unmaintained. Medical facilities found half their staff gone, forcing triage decisions that meant more deaths beyond Thanos' calculations. His method was fair in the abstract, but catastrophic in practice, because ecosystems biological and social alike depend on relationships, not just numbers. And then there was Grievous, who rejected both illusion and mathematics in favor of pure, escalating terror. He had rebuilt his separatist fleet into something leaner and more vicious than it had been during the Clone Wars. No longer did he pretend to fight for political independence or corporate interests. His communication to the galaxy was refreshingly honest. He existed to hunt, to kill, and to prove that hope was a temporary delusion ending in blood. His targets became increasingly symbolic. He would identify worlds known for resilience, for resistance, for the kind of stubborn optimism that insisted things could get better. Then he would descend and systematically butcher that optimism through public executions, broadcast massacres, and demonstrations that courage meant nothing against someone who simply did not care about heroic narrative. On Lothal, where a small rebellion had inspired others to resist, he landed in the capital and announced he would kill 100 citizens per hour until every rebel surrendered. The rebels, noble and desperate, revealed themselves. He killed them, along with the 100 citizens scheduled for that hour anyway, proving that sacrifice was not rewarded but exploited. On Alderaan, a world known for pacifism and diplomatic solutions, he challenged their greatest negotiators to convince him not to destroy their cities. They spoke eloquently of the value of life, of the possibility of understanding, of the shared consciousness that connected all beings. He listened to their entire presentation, then began systematically destroying their cities anyway, explaining that eloquence was just noise that could not stop Durasteel and lightsabers. His message was brutal in its clarity. Meaning was a story beings told themselves to make existence bearable, and he was the editor who revealed all stories ended the same way: in death, in failure, in the recognition that nothing they did mattered beyond the temporary postponement of inevitable extinction. The galaxy found itself trapped in a philosophical cage with three distinct modes of suffering. Madara offered peace at the cost of agency. Thanos offered survival at the cost of random death. Grievous offered only the certainty that hope was a lie and suffering was the only honest truth. Planetary governors faced impossible calculations: resist Madara and maintain autonomy, but risk imperial retaliation or Thanos' culling. Submit to Thanos' balance and survive, but potentially attract Grievous's attention for demonstrating too much resilience. Flee to Madara's zones of pacification and survive, but lose all motivation and agency. In the Senate's remaining halls, in the Rebel Alliance's secret bases, in the hidden Jedi temples where survivors meditated on the Force, the same question echoed: what was the acceptable price for survival when all paths led to different forms of extinction? And beneath it all, Palpatine watched his empire dissolve not through rebellion but through the demonstration that control itself was a spectrum with no satisfactory point. He had built his reign on being the only legitimate source of authority. Now three beings had entered his domain, and proven authority was just another word for the particular way you broke people. The cost of order, it turned out, was discovering that every order was equally catastrophic, and the galaxy would pay that cost in full before this was over. The final confrontation began not with a declaration but with the Force itself screaming. Across the galaxy, every remaining Jedi felt it simultaneously a rupture in the cosmic fabric, as if reality itself had developed a fault line and was beginning to shear apart. Force sensitives collapsed mid-meditation, overwhelmed by visions that contradicted each other, futures that could not coexist but somehow did. On Mortis, the ancient realm where the Force's living embodiments had once maintained balance, something stirred in the ruins. The father was dead, the son and daughter were gone, but the Force remembered their purpose: to maintain equilibrium between light and dark, chaos and order, life and death. Now that equilibrium faced threats that existed outside its binary, the Force pulled them together, not through manipulation or prophecy, but through the simple fact that three beings of absolute will create gravitational distortions in destiny itself, and distortions attract each other until they collide. They met again on Coruscant, the galaxy's political heart, where Palpatine had ruled for decades from his throne of careful tyranny. The Emperor watched from his palace as three figures converged on the abandoned Senate building, that vast amphitheater where democracy had died to thunderous applause. Madara stood in the Chancellor's pod, overlooking thousands of empty seats. "This is where your republic fell," he observed, "where fear won through rhetoric and manipulation, a gradual surrender masquerading as choice. It would have been kinder to simply remove their illusion of agency from the start. It would have been wiser to recognize this civilization's unsustainability and enact correction before it metastasized into empire." Thanos countered, rising from a senator's seat far below. "Your republic and this empire are both symptoms of the same disease: expansion without limit, consumption without consequence. The galaxy needed culling 1,000 years ago. Instead, it received democracy and dictatorship in sequence, both equally delusional about available resources. Still you both pretend these beings matter." Grievous growled from the shadows of a high balcony, his forearms spread like a mechanical angel of extinction. "Still you construct elaborate justifications for existence. The Republic fell because it was always going to fall. This empire will collapse because everything collapses. Your peace, Uchiha, is just slower extinction. Your balance, Titan, is just slower extinction with mathematics. Honesty would be admitting that all roads lead to the same conclusion, and that conclusion is dust." The Senate chamber's acoustics, designed to amplify voices so all could hear, now carried their philosophies like weapons. Madara's response was to activate the culmination of months of preparation. The infinite Tsukuyomi he had been building, not across one world but across thousands simultaneously, cascaded into reality. The moon above Coruscant turned blood red, reflected in his Rin Sharingan, and every being on the planet felt reality shift. Suddenly, the war was over. The Empire had never happened. The Clone Wars were a distant memory. They were home, safe, surrounded by everyone they had ever loved, living in perfect contentment. Stormtroopers dropped weapons and embraced invisible families. Imperial officers wept with relief at finally being released from duty. Even Palpatine, in his throne room, felt the illusions pull a vision of himself as Supreme Chancellor of a republic that had never fallen, respected rather than feared, governing justly over a grateful galaxy. But the illusion could not fully take Thanos. His will, honed by centuries of purpose, recognized the neural manipulation for what it was. "You would trap them in dream," he said, walking through projections that tried to convince him he was home on Titan with his people restored. "You would make them happy slaves. But happiness does not alter resource mathematics. Even in your illusion, they consume, they reproduce, they expand. You have changed nothing but their awareness of the problem." He raised his hand, and the infinity stones he had claimed from his native universe smuggled through dimensional barriers, bound to his will through sheer determination, began to glow. Reality itself became negotiable. With the reality stone he pierced Madara's illusion. With the soul stone he anchored conscious minds to their actual bodies, not their projected dreams. With the space stone he ensured the scope of their confrontation could not spread beyond Coruscant, protecting the greater galaxy from what was about to occur. "If you will not accept necessary balance," Thanos stated with the finality of heat death, "then I will enforce it upon you both." The power stone channeled through his gauntlet, and he struck Madara's Susanoo with force sufficient to atomize continents. The chakra construct cracked, reformed, cracked again. Madara's Rinnegan flared as he absorbed the kinetic energy and reflected it back amplified, a perfect counter that should have worked. It did not. Because Thanos was not using energy that could be absorbed. He was using reality's fundamental authority, rewriting the laws of physics themselves to ensure that force equaled consequence, that power could not be redirected without cost. They clashed in a battle that made the force itself recoil. Madara's techniques bent perception, space, and time. Thanos's stones rewrote matter, soul, and causality. The Senate building began to collapse not from physical damage, but from ontological uncertainty. Reality, no longer sure what state it should occupy. And then Grievous joined, not to help either side but to prove philosophy was irrelevant. He attacked both simultaneously, his 4 lightsabers carving arcs through Madara's Susanoo and Thanos's defenses with the systematic precision of someone who had spent lifetimes studying how to kill beings vastly more powerful than himself. He could not match their cosmic power, but he did not need to. He simply needed to demonstrate that all their philosophy meant nothing against relentless, intelligent violence applied without hesitation or moral complication. His lightsabers found gaps in Madara's chakra constructs, exploited cooling moments when Thanos redirected energy. He could not kill them, but he could make them bleed, could force them to acknowledge that raw determination mattered as much as cosmic power. The battle escalated beyond comprehension. Madara created entire alternate realities to trap his opponents. Thanos collapsed those realities with the reality stone. Grievous simply ignored the metaphysics and kept attacking whatever was physically present. The Force tried to reassert itself, to guide the conflict towards some predetermined resolution, but found 3 wills that refused to acknowledge its authority. And then Palpatine made his move. The Emperor had watched, had analyzed, had waited for the moment when all 3 were weakened. Now he struck, channeling force lightning so potent it turned the sky black, drawing on decades of accumulated dark side power, targeting not their bodies but their fundamental existence in this reality. "You presume to reshape my galaxy?" his voice thundered. "I am the Sithari. I am the culmination of 1,000 years of dark side mastery. This realm belongs to me." His lightning struck all 3 simultaneously, and for a moment, just a moment, it seemed he would win through sheer accumulated power and ruthless timing. Then the 3 turned on him. Madara trapped him in a genjutsu that showed him every future simultaneously, paralyzing him with infinite possibility. Thanos reached through the Soul Stone and showed him the truth of his own philosophy, that power hoarded was power wasted, that his empire served only his ego, not any sustainable purpose. Grievous simply walked through the lightning as if it were rain and drove a lightsaber through the Emperor's chest with mechanical precision. Palpatine fell, not dramatically but with the quiet finality of someone discovering they were never as important as they believed. The Force shattered, not destroyed but fragmented. No longer a singular cosmic will guiding destiny, but 1,000 streams flowing in contradictory directions. The light and dark remained, but without unified purpose, without coherent narrative, without the certainty that had defined the galaxy for millennia. 3 philosophies had entered a galaxy built on the binary of light versus dark. They had not chosen a side. They had rejected the premise, and in doing so, They had broken prophecy itself. The aftermath was not dramatic. There were no parades, no celebrations, no monuments erected to mark the moment the galaxy changed forever. Instead, there was the slow, confused awakening of a civilization discovering it was no longer certain about anything. The empire collapsed within months, not through rebellion but through the simple fact that fear required a central authority to dispense it, and Palpatine was dead. Vader had vanished, his fate unknown. The Grand Moffs competed for power, and found that without the Emperor's dark side authority binding them, they were simply warlords with fleets, and fleets require logistics that no longer functioned reliably. The rebellion achieved its goal, then discovered the goal had become irrelevant. They had fought for freedom from tyranny, but tyranny had been dismantled by forces that cared nothing for their cause. Some celebrated. Others felt vaguely cheated, their heroic narrative interrupted by cosmic beings who had simply proven the Empire was inadequate. And the three conquerors. Madara stood in the ruins of the Senate building, observing the fractured force with something like satisfaction. He had not fully implemented his infinite Tsukuyomi, not yet. The galaxy was not ready for the gift he offered. They still believed in choice, in struggle, in the idea that meaning required conflict, but he had planted the seeds. Across 1,000 worlds, beings remembered his illusions of peace with something deeper than nostalgia. They remembered what life felt like without fear, without war, without the grinding exhaustion of survival. He would return when the galaxy had suffered enough to truly appreciate what he offered, when they were ready to trade agency for contentment. Until then, he would study this new reality, learn its rules, and prepare for the day when the infinite Tsukuyomi would seem not like imprisonment, but like mercy. He vanished into the foresaw what remained of Eta Ghost in the mechanism of destiny, patient and inevitable. Thanos departed more concretely. He had reviewed the galactic census data, calculated the trajectory, confirmed his assessment. This galaxy was heading toward resource catastrophe within 5 centuries. His culling had bought them perhaps another 100 years, nothing more. They had not learned from the gift of balance. They would continue reproducing, consuming, expanding until the mathematics of extinction reasserted themselves. He could enforce balance again, but he recognized the futility. These beings did not want sustainability. They wanted hope, even if hope led to extinction. They would rather die believing in possibility than live within constraints. So be it. He left the galaxy through the space stone, seeking other realities where populations might possess the wisdom to accept necessary sacrifice. Behind him, he left monuments to mathematical truth that the galaxy would probably ignore. Worlds functioning perfectly at exactly half their previous populations, proving that less could be more if beings were willing to see it. The Titan who had been called mad was simply tired. Let them learn through catastrophe then. Let mathematics teach what mercy could not. Grievous's end was more conventional. In the final battle, Thanos' reality stone had damaged his life support systems, and Madara's genjutsu had briefly forced him to confront something he had spent decades fleeing. The memory of who he had been before the cybernetics, before the hatred, before he had traded suffering for purpose. He crawled through the Senate ruins, his mechanical lungs wheezing their final breaths, his 4 arms dragging a body that had long since stopped serving any function but violence. He thought about the Jedi he had killed, the hope he had murdered, the philosophy he had embodied. That meaning was illusion and suffering was truth. In his final moments he wondered if perhaps suffering was just another illusion, another story beings told themselves to make existence bearable. Then his systems failed, and the cyborg who had believed in nothing discovered if nothing waited for him afterward. The galaxy moved on. It always did. Historians would debate whether the 3 conquerors had been invaders or liberators, villains or dark prophets. Philosophers would argue about their legacies, their meanings, their lessons, but in the quiet spaces between planets, in the meditation chambers where Jedi survivors tried to reconnect with a force that no longer spoke in coherent prophecy, in the agricultural worlds where farmers simply tended crops without wondering if they mattered, something had fundamentally changed. The galaxy had encountered certainty in 3 distinct flavors: the certainty of enforced peace, the certainty of mathematical necessity, and the certainty that nothing was certain at all. And having met those absolute philosophies, it had collectively shrugged and continued existing anyway, neither enlightened nor destroyed but simply ongoing. Perhaps that was the real lesson, that existence did not require philosophical justification, that beings would choose struggle over peace, hope over mathematics, meaning over nihilism, not because any choice was objectively correct, but because consciousness, given the option, preferred to keep choosing. 3 conquerors had entered the galaxy believing they possessed answers to existence's fundamental questions. They had demonstrated their power, proven their philosophies, broken the systems that claimed authority over destiny itself. And the galaxy, mortal and messy and irrational, had absorbed their lessons and continued making the same mistakes with slightly more awareness that mistakes were inevitable. Somewhere in the ruins of the old order and the chaos of the new, that felt almost like wisdom, the force fractured into countless streams, flowed on without knowing where it was going. And perhaps that was the only honest relationship with destiny anyone could ever have.